Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about how to play Vengeance Demon Hunter in Dragonflight Patch 10.1.5. Prior to this recent patch, Demon Hunter was the most popular tank in Mythic Plus. It was the meta tank. Now, thanks to a massive group of buffs with the patch, Bear Druid has taken their place as the meta tank. But Demon Hunter will always be the meta tank. That's right, I'm doing wordplay. But also it is very good. Definitely the second best Mythic Plus tank in the game right now, and if or when Bear Druid gets nerfed, which your guess is as good as mine on that one, Demon Hunter should be right there to rise back up to the top. You know, probably. You never know exactly what Blizzard's thinking when it comes to balancing damage and everything else between tank specs, but odds are pretty good that Demon Hunter will still be strong moving forward throughout the expansion. It's certainly good right now. In terms of how Vengeance Demon Hunters play, they're kind of a Swiss Army knife when it comes to tanking. They take a little bit of everything that a lot of other tanks do. They have this combination of different defensive layers where they get a rolling 12% damage reduction buff here, a bunch of teeny tiny little 2% damage reduction buffs from this other talent that stack up over and over again, might be at times 10% damage reduction and at other times 30%. They have really powerful defensive cooldowns that they're rolling all across all the targets that are in a pack, kind of desynced from each other, giving them like 40% damage reduction on half the guys in the group. It's interesting and weird, but it basically means that they do a little bit of everything, and all of it adds up to create a really fully developed tank that feels like a lot of pieces of other tanks all mashed together in a way that works. They're mobile, they have self-healing, they have good mitigation tools, they have great defensive cooldowns, really high uptime on those cooldowns, and they deal great damage, especially in AoE. There's literally nothing more that you could ask for. Now, as I said, Bear Druid is the tank of the moment in this patch. In Mythic Plus, Demon Hunter was before. They're still second overall. What's interesting though is that neither of them are very popular in Raid. This is partly due to Blood DK always being popular in raids because it's tanky, and fight specifics making paladins popular due to their immunities like Divine Shield and Blessing of Spell Warding. But mostly it's because of the debuff matrix that still exists for some reason. Windwalker monks suck, as usual. This makes Brewmaster monks a much more popular option for filling that mandatory monk debuff matrix slot. Similarly, Havoc Demon Hunter's pretty good. It's not the best spec in the game, but it is like a top 5 melee spec. And that means that bringing a Havoc Demon Hunter to fill that Demon Hunter debuff slot is very feasible, justifiable. Like, you want one pretty much. And that's the main reason that Vengeance Demon Hunter's not that popular in raids. I think if all the debuff matrix garbage was removed from the game, or just in some way invalidated in the very rigid class specificity that it requires, and the factors like group utility such as Paladin Spell Warding, Bear Druid's Innervate, and group healing, and that kind of thing were no longer concerns, Vengeance Demon Hunter would be a top 2 or 3 tank spec in Raid right now, as opposed to like bottom 2. I think this is pretty well backed up by the fact that they are the second most popular spec in Mythic Plus right now, and their defensive profile is arguably suited even better toward Raid than it is toward Mythic Plus. This is mainly due to the nature of their defensive cooldowns. You can already have some sort of cooldown rolling most of the time in Mythic Plus, and because most of the fights in Aberrus are basic taunt swaps in which you're only tanking a boss about half of the time, you're able to have some sort of cooldown rolling virtually all of the time that you're tanking the boss in Raid on a Demon Hunter. This makes you really hard to kill. You know, it's very much an apples and oranges comparison to compare like Demon Hunter and Prot Warrior, but the idea of having like shield wall up for every time you taunt is bananas, and that's kind of the way that Demon Hunters operate. And on that note, Vengeance Demon Hunter is a relatively easy class to play as well. Generating threat, especially AoE threat, is pretty easy. It's just built into the core rotation, really. The same goes for the healing as well. It's not like Blood DK where you have to reactively self-heal and time things out and manage multiple resources to achieve the incredible amount of self-healing that they're capable of doing. It's not like Monk, where you have 1,000 different keybinds. It's not like Paladin or Warrior with tons and tons of different cooldowns even. Demon Hunter has a pretty tight toolkit. It's not very heavy on group utility, unfortunately, especially in raids. It basically just has the DH debuff, but it's simple, easy, and very effective. You don't have to do anything fancy to pick up mobs at the start of pulls, and it's just a very satisfying gameplay loop because of that. I called Demon Hunter the total package a bunch of times in videos in the run up to Dragonflight, and then they got nerfed right at the start of the expansion, like week 1 or 2, and basically fell off a cliff until season 2, but now they're back right where they belong in the thick of things. Super strong, super versatile, super fun, and best of all, just an easy class to play that deals a lot of damage. What more could you ask for? Alright, I always do this now. What is it good at? Everything. Like I said before, it's not popular in raids right now, but that really is Windwalker Monk's fault. It's Windwalker Monk sucks, Havoc doesn't. Outside of that annoying debuff matrix design, Vengeance Demon Hunter is a very, very, well-rounded, just spherical tank. It's an orb. It does everything extremely well, and it's qualified to handle absolutely every possible tanking situation with grace and ease. The only thing I can think of that Demon Hunter doesn't have is, it doesn't have the ability to dispel magic from itself like Brewmaster Monk does with diffuse magic, which can be useful in some strategies for phase 2 to 3 transition on Mythic Sarkareth. That's about the only thing I can figure out. I thought about this for a while, obviously, considering I got to that, and I think if I had to pick out the single greatest weakness for Demon Hunter, it's not any of the things I said already. It's not those annoying debuff matrix constraints, because that is something that can change quickly. All it takes is a Windwalker Monk revamp, or, for Mistweaver Monk to be good, which might actually, it's probably more likely than Windwalker Monk, although I wouldn't gamble on Mistweaver Monk ever being great. But also, the next tier could just have no fights that require spell warding or death grip. It's possible. This happens from time to time. It's certainly not Demon Hunter's lack of group utility, because they do have really good crowd control tools. AoE stuns, AoE fear, AoE silence, potentially even Sigil of Chains, although I would rather have a Blood DK Scorpions Grasp if I really do need to grip a group of enemies together. I think the biggest weakness for Demon Hunter is their race options. You have Night Elf and you have Blood Elf, and that's it. You don't have Dwarf. You don't have Tauren. No High Mountain Tauren, Void Elf, Koltiran, Goblin. Just Blood Elf and Night Elf. There's a lore justification for it, and it is what it is. I guess it would be really stupid for a Koltiran to be a Demon Hunter, just a fridge running around. Dancing and diving and all, but it would numerically be a lot stronger than being a Blood Elf, and that probably is the biggest issue with the class from a pure numerical standpoint. Alright, now let's talk about Demon Hunter's tier set bonuses. They're simple, but complicated. The 2-piece bonus makes soul fragments heal for 10% more, so depending on what you're doing and how you're spec'd, that's maybe 4 to 7% more healing, we'll say 5% more self-healing. And that's really good. It also makes generating a soul fragment, not consuming it, generating it, increase your fire damage by 2% for 6 seconds. As with most things that affect Demon Hunter, multiple applications of that buff overlap, so it's a good healing and damage increase bonus, and while the numbers look small, they interact with a lot of other things in your kit to have a really strong multiplicative effect that's actually very good. The 4-piece bonus makes Fracture deal fire damage, which is a big damage increase on its own since it is your highest single target damage skill, and by being fire damage, it not only benefits from your 5% more magic damage done Demon Hunter debuff, it also bypasses armor. So for bosses, that's 20 or 30% more damage for Fracture against raid bosses. I said bosses twice in that sentence. Oh well, whatever. It's great. Additionally, after consuming 20 soul fragments, your next cast of Fracture applies Fiery Brand for 6 seconds to its target. And this is a complicated part of this set bonus. It's definitely the thing that I'm going to spend a paragraph writing and talking about. First off, it's amazing. I geared my Demon Hunter from like 380 item level to 430 in just a couple of weeks, and as a side note, I love this new gearing system. But anyway, the difference between the before and after getting the 4-piece was enormous. The class is very fun and strong without those bonuses, and I really, like I said, I really enjoyed it, even with Garbanzo gear where I had no bonuses, nothing going on. But these tier set bonuses do represent an enormous boost in damage output and defensive cooldown uptime, and made the class way stronger than it was in Season 1. Just to jump ahead a bit into the talents and rotation sections of this video and kind of pull back the tier related stuff here, once you have that 4-piece, and arguably even beforehand, you want to use the talents that are on the right hand side of the spec tree that interact with Fiery Brand. So we're talking Fiery Demise, Burning Alive, Charred Flesh, and Down in Flames. All of these interact positively with the 4-piece, but the real moneymaker there is Burning Alive. That's a talent that makes Fiery Brand spread to new targets every 2 seconds. When it spreads, it applies a new Fiery Brand to a nearby target. This new Fiery Brand has a 10-second duration regardless of whether it was spread by a real Fiery Brand that you cast by, pressing the keybind, or the 4-piece proc, which only lasts for 6 seconds. After 2 seconds, that new Fiery Brand, that new 10-second Fiery Brand will spread a new 10-second Fiery Brand to a new target, and then that new one will spread to a new target after 2 seconds, and so on until it is spread to every enemy that you're in combat with. Just like manually casting Fiery Brand, the 4-piece resets the spreading effect from Burning Alive. And also, just like manually casting Fiery Brand, the 4-piece proc deals a big chunk of direct fire damage when you apply it. It essentially counts as though you have pressed Fiery Brand, but it's only a 6-second duration. This means that putting it onto an already Fiery Branded target makes it deal 40% more damage thanks to Fiery Demise. So just by triggering the proc doing your normal rotation even with no optimization at all, you're getting good Fiery Brand uptime from this 4-piece bonus. There's more you can do to maximize its value, and that basically just means that when you have the proc ready to go, rather than just dumping Fracture into a random target, go with God, I'm proccing this on whatever, you can apply it to the target that has most recently had Fiery Brand spread to them. That is, the target in the pack who has the most remaining Fiery Brand uptime left. It'll do 40% more damage, and it'll add 6 seconds of Fiery Brand from the 4-piece into the remaining duration on the Fiery Brand. It doesn't affect how long the subsequent spread brands are. They're going to be 10 seconds no matter what. Even if the target has 16 seconds left on a Fiery Brand, still 10 seconds, but that's still a buff to the amount of uptime you have active on at least one target in a pack. So the way it works ultimately is like this. Let's say you pull 3 mobs together. You Fiery Brand one of them, it spreads to the second and then the third. That's it, no more spreading, you're done. But if you trigger the 4-piece bonus on mob 3, doing a ton of damage and adding 6 seconds of Fiery Brand onto it while that initial Fiery Brand is up, or not, Fiery Brand will spread again. It'll go back to mob 2 and then back to mob 1, and then it'll be done spreading until you manually cast Fiery Brand or trigger it through the 4-piece. One final little note here is that whether you've refreshed it by casting it or by triggering the 4-piece, Fiery Brand can't spread onto an enemy that already has Brand. And that's why trying to add more time onto the longest remaining duration Brand target is important in terms of optimizing, because it means that once it's fallen off of another enemy in the group, it can spread off of them, and then once it falls off of another, it can spread off of them, and just ensures that you don't have any gaps. This may all seem complicated, but the TLDW is that these are really powerful bonuses. They add a ton of value without requiring that much effort on your part. You can alter the way you play to min-max the value of the 4-piece, but if you're performing the rotation effectively, it's going to be really impactful, even if you're not doing everything you can to make that 4-piece bonus sing. Okay, now let's move on to talents. Okay, here I have 2 talent setups that I want to go over. You can see in my little pop-out window here, technically I have 3, but 2 of them are identical. The 2 raid setups are exactly the same. So one of the things that I really like about Demon Hunter talents, just sort of as a broad overview here, is that you have a lot of things that don't really fluctuate. There are a lot of really good competitive talents, but there's basically just two builds. There's this one, the Mythic Plus build, which is basically the perfect combination of everything you need for Mythic Plus: tankiness, damage output, healing. That's pretty much it. And then there's the raid setup, which does sacrifice some defensive value, specifically like some of the safety belts, in order to get as much damage as you can reasonably afford. You know, still taking a lot of stuff that gives you defensive value and offensive value at the same time, because that's the whole thing with Demon Hunter. You're always getting some of each. But basically you have, you know, this option right here, AoE, whatever, and then you have more of a single target-ish, raid-oriented setup. So let's just kind of go through what's a little different with this setup. Try not to go into a massive amount of detail here, but just the things that are notable in this setup. In Mythic Plus, I don't feel like you need Vengeful Retreat. You don't really need that mobility increase, so you don't take that. Now, I really like Pursuit, and you do have to take it to get down here to get Chaos Nova, which is a very useful AoE stun. Use it as an impromptu interrupt or whatever. You also get this talent, Chaos Fragments, which gives you a pretty decent chance when you stun enemies, so only when it actually stuns them, not just hits them, to generate a soul fragment. This is a great way to get, like, not just the utility of stunning enemies, but also some valuable resource from doing that utility action. You actually get a throughput increase for using your skills. Also, just pointing out the mobility that I'm getting out of Pursuit. If I spec out of this, I would be at 100%. I have no other sources of speed at all. And I think I have a relatively high amount of mastery, 30 to 100 mastery, which is definitely more than I would like. But still, 17% move speed just passively, that's pretty great. And then you also get some move speed while Immolation Aura is up, which is most of the time out of the other side of the tree. So we're talking, I mean, look at me go. 137% move speed, walking very strangely, very up and down, but very quickly in a strange way. So anyway, that's something. Every Demon Hunter talent setup is going to come down here and take Collective Anguish. It adds a massive amount of damage onto casting Fell Devastation. And, you know, there's pretty good talents along the way. Cooldown reduction on Infernal Strike, just base mastery, magic damage reduction. Great. Similarly, over here on the right side, Will of the Illidari, max health, of course you're taking that, parry chance. Sigil duration increase, that's a direct damage increase through Sigil of Flame. It's a direct utility increase through Sigil of Silence. It's pretty good. And Quicken Sigils is just more of the same. More damage or more damage output and resource generation through Sigil of Flame. More availability through Sigil of Silence. And also activating a second faster. I mean, the difference is pretty noticeable. We'll just spec out of that for the sake of it. It's going to take longer to swap talents than it is for us to see the apparent difference. That's quite substantial. So when you're dealing with something like Sigil of Silence, where you really do want to hit all those mobs and hit them quickly and hit them before they move out of it, having Quicken Sigils is crucial. Interesting, I don't remember making this change, but all right. So in my Mythic Plus setup, I had initially had Darkness in here before I started recording. Not sure why that's the case now, why it swapped. Anyways, I generally have been running Soul Sigils in my kind of low, mid-level keys. You know, we're talking 16s or whatever. You don't really need Darkness in Mythic Plus for lower level stuff. For high level pushing, it is a pretty valuable group defensive cooldown. It's okay as a personal defensive cooldown. 8 seconds of sorta 20% damage reduction. It's not bad, but it's not mandatory. For higher level stuff where groups are more coordinated, you can call out in the voice communications that you're using, Discord or whatever, to the group casting Darkness, and they can all stack in it, or they'll just notice that you've used it because they're high level players and they're really paying a lot of attention. It has a lot of value. When you're just sort of playing with random people in whatever keys, or whatever content, like, the value of Darkness goes down quite a bit, and so I probably would run Soul Sigils instead in those situations, because when you hit an enemy with a Sigil of Flame or a Sigil of Silence, you generate 1 Soul Fragment. It's not one per enemy, it's one per cast, but I mean, that's something. It's not bad. So for easier content, I prefer Soul Sigil. For harder content, Darkness would be the way to go. And then, of course, you want to take the Hunt because it's a great source of damage. I think the last notable things I want to mention here in the Mythic Plus setup on this left side of the tree are that Aura of Pain is a huge damage increase compared to Fellblade. I mean, you're going to run Aura of Pain in all setups, but 6% Immolation Aura damage is pretty big in AoE. You're getting a lot of damage out of Immolation Aura just directly, so getting a bunch more crit on it is good. Additionally, because Pain isn't really, or Fury, I guess is what it's called now. Fury isn't really that valuable of a resource in the AoE Mythic Plus setup. The one that's not running Soul Crush, this talent over here. Generating a large amount of Fury and dealing a small amount of damage with Fellblade isn't really that valuable. It's also another key to use, and that means another GCD competing with all the rest of the stuff in your rotation. It's just not that valuable. This actually holds over in the raid setups as well. Fellblade just isn't a great talent, even in situations where you do value Fury, because it's creating GCD friction that really just isn't that helpful. It basically gets in the way of the value that it could provide. A lot of Fury. It's another keybind, it's another cooldown to track, it's not that reliable, and yeah, just not that great. Finally, here on this left-hand side of the tree, Unnatural Malice. It's a decent talent. You will run this in raid. The main reason that you don't run it in the Mythic Plus setup is you have to have that point to spend in Chaos Fragments, and that is essentially the point that you're spending there. The Chaos Fragment, basically being able to generate a Soul Fragment off of Chaos Nova, is just more damage output in raid, or I'm sorry, in Mythic Plus, it's more damage output. In raid, it's functionally worthless because you're not able to stun bosses, so this won't do anything, and so that's why you would take Unnatural Malice. The damage over time effect of the Hunt, not that big. Even in relatively large size groups, it isn't a huge damage increase. We're talking like 1 or less than 1% total damage increase out of Unnatural Malice. Not that great. In the right-hand tree, you're going to take Fell Devastation, obviously, and you're basically always going to come down here to the left and take Spirit Bomb. Just straight through. You're going to take Fracture here in this choice node. You're never going to take Shear. That playstyle is mercifully dead. You're also always going to take Fiery Brand. You do have a couple of choices here. I've gone with one that is a slight bit unconventional. I mean, it's the tiniest little change. Basically, the difference here is I think most people prefer to run Extended Spikes. I'm going to have the data on it. I know that they do. They run 1 point in Agonizing Flames and 2 points in Extended Spikes. They run a talent setup that looks like this. I prefer to switch it around, and the reason is several compounding little things. Demon Spikes is worth about 12 to 15% damage reduction from armor. Like if we just look at my armor here, I have 11,809 armor, or roughly 39% damage reduction. This isn't always the same depending on like what content you're doing and what level the enemy you're fighting is, but it's close enough. 39.23%. I hit Demon Spikes, it goes up to 20,000 armor, 53.27%. So 14-ish percent, 13.5% damage reduction. Good, but not enormous. Additionally, you have Calcified Spikes that gives you damage reduction after your Demon Spikes falls off. So you have this reward structure where having Demon Spikes up as much as you possibly can isn't exactly as rewarding as having it up and down, having it coming up and falling off. Additionally, you have Feed the Demon, which whenever you consume a Soul Fragment, you get half a second off of Demon Spikes. So you have this incentive for reducing the cooldown is very valuable. Having uptime is good, but having downtime, little spots of downtime in between is not bad. Agonizing Flames increases the duration of Immolation Aura by 25% for each point. So the base duration is 6 seconds. That's a second and a half for each point, so you get 9 seconds of Immolation Aura uptime or duration out of those 2 points. I think this winds up being a lot more impactful. For one, it just does more damage. Obviously, Extended Spikes isn't adding damage, Agonizing Flames is. But also there's the interaction with Charred Flesh, where you're getting Fiery Brand uptime duration increase out of having Immolation Aura up. The ideal would be to have 100% Immolation Aura uptime. That's not achievable in the current state of the game, and that's fine. But, you know, getting 80% is definitely better than getting 70%. And at least in my experience, I've found that this definitely increased my damage. I did a little bit of side-by-side comparison. Not gargantuan, but enough that I felt comfortable losing Extended Spikes. Additionally, because I'm not pushing like 29s, I'm really not able to feel the defensive difference of losing Extended Spikes. I think I might actually feel tankier because I'm getting more Fiery Brand uptime, but the difference is very minor. What's not minor is having these 2 talents here in the middle. Fallout, which generates a ton of soul fragments when you're in AoE situations. This isn't really a great talent in raid because often you're in single target, and generating 1 soul fragment with Immolation Aura is almost more annoying than it is helpful. But in Mythic Plus, in AoE situations, it's amazing. You can press Immolation Aura and generate 5 soul fragments and immediately Spirit Bomb. It's great. Additionally, Revel in Pain. This works with your tier set bonuses, so whenever your Fiery Brand expires, you get a great big shield. That's excellent. It's a lot of value. It really, really adds the defensive layers that you're looking for on a Demon Hunter. And yeah, I mean, it's just fantastic in Mythic Plus, especially with how often you're applying Fiery Brand, thanks to your tier set bonuses. Now, there are some people who have dropped that talent. Maybe they're just not feeling like they need the shielding, and they run Volatile Flame Blood instead. This gives you a lot of Fury. The problem is that in Mythic Plus and in this non-Soul Crush setup, Fury doesn't really translate to a lot more damage or damage reduction. Volatile Flame Blood is a great talent for generating Fury. It's just that the resource isn't that useful in this particular setup. So I don't recommend that. I do recommend sticking to Revel in Pain. I think the damage reduction is amazing and definitely worth that talent point. Finally, just to kind of key in on some of the last talents down here, Painbringer just gives you a ton of damage reduction basically all the time. If you're Spirit Bombing with 4 or 5 fragments every time, you're getting 8 to 10% damage reduction for 6 seconds every time you cast Spirit Bomb, in addition to the big healing increase. So a couple of relatively rapid succession Spirit Bombs, you might be rocking 20% damage reduction for a few seconds just off of this talent. It's great. It doesn't always get run in raid because you're not generating quite as many soul fragments, and you're getting damage reduction from other sources, most notably Frailty. But in Mythic Plus, it's amazing. Fiery Demise turns Fiery Brand into a big offensive cooldown. I've kind of talked about all of these talents already. They all have this amazing synergy with each other. Starting all the way up here at Burning Blood, and just this whole line has tons of damage and damage reduction synergy, and that's really great. The last couple notable talents in this setup are Soul Carver and Fodder to the Flame. Soul Carver's just a great big damage nuke, does a bunch of fire damage, so it synergizes nicely with Fiery Demise and Fiery Brand. It generates a bunch of soul fragments, so you can quickly Spirit Bomb out of it. It basically gives you a couple of Spirit Bombs along with Immolation Aura and Fallout. You jump into a group, get Fiery Brand up, hit a Soul Carver, you're Spirit Bomb, and you're slamming. Last Resort, great sort of safety net defensively, really valuable in Mythic Plus. A lot of the raid setups, the raid setup I'm going to show does not use it, and if you feel like you really want it in raid, you can literally just run this setup in raid. It will be fine. You'll do less single target damage, but you will have that safety net. You will have that great damage reduction. You'll be all right. And Fodder to the Flame, it's just easier to use than Elysian Decree. It does actually add up to more damage as well. It's uncontrollable. That's really the one irritating aspect of it. A lot of situations where the demons will spawn like right after a critical damage moment where you really wanted to get some burst out. But because we lost all of the Shadowlands bonuses to Elysian Decree, it's just not that great. Just not that big of a source of damage. Doesn't synergize with anything else because it deals arcane damage. Just kind of frustrating. And it is yet another keybind. So, better to keep it simple, especially considering that the simpler setup does more damage. All right, now here we have the raid setup, and as we can see, a couple of things have shifted away. I dropped Pursuit because I don't really feel like I need mobility that much in raid. I took Vengeful Retreat mainly just to get these 2 points in Unrestrained Fury, because Fury generation, having big pools of Fury and never wasting Fury, is a lot more important in raid, and that's because of Soul Crush. There's a lot of talents over here that synergize with Soul Crush. Obviously, there's the base Frailty, there's Spirit Bomb, there's Void Reaver that gives you damage reduction when you have Frailty on a target, and makes Soul Cleave hit enemies with Frailty, or apply Frailty to enemies it hits. There's Vulnerability that makes you do more damage to Frailtied targets, and then Soul Crush, ignites and really sends all of those into the stratosphere by making Frailty stack. It also makes Soul Cleave apply Frailty to your primary target for 8 seconds, so you're getting a base Frailty for 6 seconds on everything you hit with Soul Cleave, but then you're getting another one with Soul Cleave for 8 seconds on that primary target. So double stacking Frailty on your primary target, getting damage reduction, leech, or healing, basically the same thing, damage output, all this valuable stuff out of Frailty, which you generate by basically hitting Spirit Bomb or Soul Cleave. So Fury is very valuable in that situation. Because of that, you'll want to have Unrestrained Fury so that your cap is larger, you never waste any. You definitely want to have Aura of Pain to increase the crit chance of Immolation Aura. And you want to have Volatile Flame Blood so that when it crits, it generates Fury. All of this working together to give you as much Fury as you possibly can have. A lot of this stuff over here on the left-hand side of the tree stays the same. One notable talent that I've added is Precise Sigils. This is purely a quality of life addition. It gives you 2 seconds of extra sigil duration. The only sigil that you have in this setup is Sigil of Flame, so it's just 1 more tick of Sigil of Flame. Not a huge damage increase, but it does make it so that when you press it, it will cast at your target's location. You can also run Concentrated Sigils. They'll place where you're standing. Same deal. You can also make macros that do these same functions, at player and at target macros. They work the same, and if you have these talented, those at player and at target macros will actually still work, or at cursor and at player macros, excuse me. Really not an essential talent in any situation. There just aren't great other options. You could take Pursuit, but if you have Vengeful Retreat and you have 2 charges of Infernal Strike, you probably don't also need all that extra move speed as well. Notably, we're not taking Fallout because the ability to generate like 1 fragment with Immolate or Immolation Aura just isn't that great. For AoE situations in Raid, which pretty much is just Zakali Assault, I would take this talent. But that's about the only one that stands out, and that fight is not super difficult. I've already talked about all the wonderful Frailty stuff. There's also Focus Cleave that just gives you some more damage. There's Soul Furnace that gives you more damage every now and then on your Spirit Bomb or Soul Cleave. Pretty straightforward stuff. I think the last thing I want to mention here is Dark Glare Boon, which gives you a lot of cooldown reduction and refunds a bunch of Fury spent on Fell Devastation, making that even more of a net positive in terms of Fury generation. It really makes it so that unless you're holding for a specific mechanic, you want to use Fell Devastation on cooldown in Raid. That's generally true in Mythic Plus, but there are some situations where you're nearing the end of a pull and you want to hold it for the start of the next pull. So you can jump in, Immolation Aura, Sigil of Flames, all that stuff, and then Fell Devastation, a big pack of mobs. Really blast them away. In Raid, it really is more about just getting more resource. It's not actually about the direct damage that Fell Devastation does, although that is also nice. It's mostly just about getting those metas up and getting as many fractures off as you can while you have Metamorphosis up, generating more soul fragments and more fury. So you can get more soul cleaves out for more soul crush, frailty, blah, blah, blah. If you wanted to pick up another talent somewhere else, maybe you were worried about defenses, you could drop one of these points in Dark Glare Boon and take Revel in Pain. That's a valuable option. Similarly, if you wanted to generate more soul fragments for a fight like Zakali Assault, you could drop 1 point in Dark Glare Boon and take Fallout. And there you go. You could also just drop like, I think that really is the main option. There's not a ton of other great options to drop, unfortunately. It would be ideal to drop like Calcified Spikes or Roaring Fire, but these are talents that you need to navigate down the tree. I suppose you could drop Agonizing Flames, but I think that winds up being worse in terms of damage output and resource generation through Volatile Flame Blood. All right, that's it. Now let's go over abilities. Demon Hunter is the epitome of the builder-spender playstyle that Blizzard has created for classes in WoW and Diablo over the years. You generate Fury and Souls with Fracture, Immolation Aura, and Sigil of Flame, and then you spend those resources with Spirit Bomb or Soul Cleave. How you prioritize your resources is really dependent on whether you're in Raid or Mythic Plus, depending on which of the two talent setups, the two main ones anyway, that you're using. You have these two main resources, Fury and Souls. Fury is really important in Raid as you are using Fury to generate and maintain stacks of Frailty, but in Mythic Plus you aren't using Soul Crush, you aren't using any of those things that synergize with Frailty, so you're not going to be able to roll Frailty stacks, and as a result, Fury isn't really very important. Instead, generating and consuming as many souls as you can becomes your main priority, both for maximizing your damage output with Spirit Bomb, but also your self-healing, which is also mainly done through Spirit Bomb. This also has great synergy with the 4-piece and 2-piece bonuses in your tier set. The skills that generate Fury also generate souls and vice versa for the most part. Because of this, consuming Fury and souls is linked. In general, you want to use Spirit Bomb whenever you have 4 or 5 soul fragments available, without exception. The cap on active fragments is 5, so you don't want to waste soul fragments by generating them once you're over that 4 stack count. Instead, you want to consume them with Spirit Bomb. This would be generating them and wasting them would be a huge waste of potential resources and damage. You also don't want a Spirit Bomb with fewer than 4 fragments normally, as that wastes Fury and makes it so that you have to waste souls later while you're generating enough Fury to cast Spirit Bomb. If you have leftover Fury immediately after casting Spirit Bomb and no souls available, you can use Soul Cleave to dump out Fury. This is really only something you want to do in Raid, because in Mythic Plus, casting Soul Cleave does very little damage and healing, and it has no interaction with the rest of your kit. It's not a complete waste, but it does spend Fury you probably want to save to be able to cast Spirit Bomb or Fell Devastation, and in Raids it's the exact opposite. You want to cast Spirit Bomb to eat up your souls, and then you want to dump out the rest of your Fury with Soul Cleave to generate more Frailty stacks before generating more souls. It's a back and forth cycle where you're generating 2 resources at once, you're consuming one, then you're consuming the other, then you're generating both again, consuming one, then the other, repeat, repeat, repeat. In both setups, you want to make sure you're never actively wasting resources. The valuable ones, anyway. In Raid, this means you really don't want to waste souls or Fury, whereas in Mythic Plus, it means never waste souls. Try not to waste Fury, but it's really not the end of the world if you do. As long as you're doing everything you can to maximize the generation and consumption of souls in Mythic Plus, you're doing great. You're slamming. This means you never want to let Fracture, Immolation Aura, or Sigil of Flame sit on cooldown, and you really don't want to use Soul Cleave when you have souls available. Souls should always be consumed with Spirit Bomb. This can sometimes be easier said than done. Souls have a delay on when they spawn. It's the biggest frustration about Demon Hunter, that they are physical objects that exist in the world instead of just being a combo point system. It's not the end of the world, it's just not ideal. Sometimes you will generate some souls, you will press Spirit Bomb, you are sure that they're all gone, you go to hit Soul Cleave, and then there was a little bit of server-side lag or delay or whatever, and boop, 2 more souls popped out and you just wasted them on a Soul Cleave. It happens to everybody. Now as for Soul Cleave, this isn't Shadowlands anymore. In Shadowlands, there were several really strong defensive bonuses that rewarded you, either offensively or defensively, for casting Soul Cleave and consuming souls with Soul Cleave, to the point that you wouldn't want to run Spirit Bomb in single target setups. Those bonuses are all dead. Long live Spirit Bomb. Your offensive cooldowns are mostly pretty simple. You have Fell Devastation, which is a combination of offensive and defensive cooldown. Kind of its value fluctuates a bit depending on your talents, but it procs you 6 seconds of meta and heals you a bunch, so it is a pretty effective defensive cooldown. You kind of want to treat it like a defensive layer of its own. In most situations, I just try to use Fell Devastation as often as I can, like an offensive cooldown, but if you're near the end of a pull in Mythic Plus, or ads are about to spawn in Raid, holding a bit to burn down a large pack of ads is a really good idea. It's just a really strong source of AoE damage for those moments. Additionally, because it is a huge defensive cooldown, you can use it to live through big tank hits like Rashok combos or Sarkareth's Void Slash. Soul Carver is a single target damage cooldown that generates a bunch of souls over a couple of seconds and deals a lot of damage. It's really good for quickly building up Spirit Bomb. The Hunt doesn't generate any souls, it just does a lot of damage and gives you a very large amount of leech against the primary target for a while. I think it was nerfed down to 20 seconds, used to be 30. Either way, it's still just a really good single target damage nuke that also applies a dot to everything you pass through along the way to your primary target, so ideally you want to target the furthest back enemy in a group of ads. Elysian Decree has fallen out of favor, but it is an option for on-demand AoE burst damage and soul generation. Pretty simple, and really not that great anymore. Unfortunately, I liked it conceptually, it just losing the Shadowlands Legendary and Soulbind bonuses kind of killed it. In the case of all of these cooldowns, in Mythic Plus you can mostly just free fire them and you're good. That is the big benefit of not bothering to use Frailty. For Soul Carver, which deals fire damage, you do want to have Fiery Brand active on the target first, but that's about all the setup you need. You can pop a potion, you can have a trinket proc if you have an on-use stat trinket, and you get Fiery Brand up and then you just blow all your cooldowns, you're blasting. In Raid, it is a bit more coordinated. You want to get several stacks of Frailty up on enemies before you use your cooldowns so that the damage is multiplied by all of those Frailty stacks. It's pretty simple. Frailty gives you 4% more damage per stack, so if you can get to 5 or 6 stacks active on a target and then hit them with the Hunt, it's going to do 20-24% more damage. Considering that the Hunt and Soul Carver can do over 100,000 damage per cast easy, getting at least a few stacks of Frailty up is very important. You also wouldn't want to use the Hunt as your opening global, for example. You want to get, the bare minimum of like 1 cast of Sigil of Flames, Spirit Bomb, and Soul Cleave off before using those main cooldowns. So that would still be like 3 or 4 stacks. 12 to 16% more damage, that's good. But ideally you want to get somewhere between 5 and up in terms of Frailty stacks before casting those major offensive cooldowns in Raid, and that's just in order to maximize your damage output. The same goes for Fell Devastation and Fiery Brand as well, since they do hit very hard. You can't fit every single one of these into a single 5-stack Frailty window, so you do have to kind of seesaw it. You build up some Frailty stacks, throw a couple of cooldowns out, generate more Souls of Fury to quickly build up more Frailty stacks, burn the rest of your cooldowns, and do that until you have just the ability to proceed into your normal rotation until those cooldowns come back up. The subsequent times in a fight when they come back up, they'll generally be a little bit desynced, so it is quite a bit easier to fit, say, 1 or 2 in than like 4 at a time. Now let's go over your main defensive skills. You have Demon Spikes, which is a very simple active mitigation skill. You press it and your armor goes up. That's pretty much it. It is a really important defensive layer though, and you should make good use of it whenever you're tanking. It's just not complex. The worst thing you can do as a Demon Hunter, probably, is to not hit Demon Spikes enough. You do take a lot less damage whenever you have it active. Now thanks to calcified spikes, losing Demon Spikes is actually a really important defensive layer as well, and I love this. You get a damage reduction buff as a reward for losing a damage reduction buff. That's great. Because of this, the ideal way to use Demon Spikes is actually to juggle it on and off over and over while tanking, rather than just to like spam the button. You don't have to let it fall off for long, literally 1 millisecond I think is all the server needs. And this is a relatively minor defensive optimization that you don't absolutely have to do. But if you are trying to min-max the defensive aspects of the class, it really is a strong bonus once you get comfortable with optimizing it. It basically adds another 5 to 12% damage reduction if you're able to maintain it effectively. Pretty good. Soul Cleave and Spirit Bomb are both self-heals, and the soul fragments they consume also heal you for a percentage of the damage you've taken recently. It's like Blood DK's Death Strike in the same way that like La Croix is like champagne. They got bubbles. They're technically healing. It's nowhere near as strong as a Blood DK, and it's not as big a component of your defensive toolkit as Death Strike is for Blood DK either. Self-healing's important. You gotta have it to stay alive. It's just nowhere close to the backbone of your ability to stay alive like it is for Blood DK. It's one ingredient in the stew. You know, it's carrots. It's in there, you can tell it's there, but it's just one of the many things that is keeping you alive. Now, as for defensive cooldowns, you got Metamorphosis and Fiery Brand. Those are the two, but they are super important and super strong. Fiery Brand is the weirdest defensive cooldown in this game. It is a single target shield wall. Now, thanks to burning alive, it will spread to nearby enemies every 2 seconds. This massively increases its value in AoE and is a crucial part of why Demon Hunter is so tanky in Mythic Plus. Fiery Brand is also a major offensive cooldown thanks to Fiery Demise and the fact that you basically deal exclusively fire damage as a Demon Hunter. Fiery Brand's initial hit and the damage over time effect also just hit hard too, so it's a really strong all-around cooldown, kind of fitting with every single other aspect of this class thematically. Every aspect of their offense is also defensive, every aspect of their defense is also offensive. And on that note, Metamorphosis is your big defensive cooldown. It is the shield wall last standy thing. It gives you a massive boost to health and armor, so it's useful for any defensive purpose. It's good as a proactive skill to use before a big boss hit, but it's also good to use as like a mitigation tool to mitigate tons of damage from large packs of enemies, or even as a reactive defensive cooldown if your health suddenly drops low. It also increases the amount of fury and souls that you generate with Fracture. So once again, your most defensive skill, your most absolute peak of defensive capabilities adds a bunch of offensive value as well. You can also get Last Resort, which is a cheat death that triggers Metamorphosis if you would have died, and it is on an 8-minute cooldown. If you are the biggest degenerate in the universe, you can intentionally trigger Last Resort to get meta and get basically a free offensive cooldown out of it. I wouldn't do it, but it's been done. Now let's talk about how to pull on a Vengeance Demon Hunter. I know pulling packs of mobs in dungeons can be challenging for newer players, so it's something I always like to emphasize. First off, holding threat in AoE on a Demon Hunter is relatively easy. In general, you want to Infernal Strike into a pack, hit Demon Spikes and Immolation Aura as you are in the air reaching the pack of enemies, and if you have 4 more souls generated right off the bat, you can Spirit Bomb pretty much straight away. Otherwise, I would hit Fracture once, then Spirit Bomb, and that's pretty much it. You have threat. From there, you can just do your normal rotation, cast Fiery Brand, couple more Fractures, more Spirit Bomb, the whole thing. If you're comfortable with it, you can open by putting Sigil of Flame down under your enemy right before you Infernal Strike in. Basically, Sigil of Flame, Leap, Demon Spikes and Immolation Aura, Spirit Bomb. That is actually the ideal way to do it. It works really well. It is a little bit more effort to pull off, but very effective for generating threat. Alright, in terms of stats, Demon Hunters want to enchant and gem for haste. I think Leech is probably the best option for Bracer and Cloak enchant since you do a lot of damage and the Leech healing adds up fairly quickly. Avoidance is also pretty good for raid situations. It's worth a lot of AoE damage reduction. The only one I wouldn't really run is Speed, and I normally like Speed a lot, but you're so mobile on a Demon Hunter that it feels a little unnecessary. That being said, if you wanted to just like be an insane speed demon, which I have done, you can put speed on everything and even run a speed gem in one of your sockets, and with Immolation Aura up, you will have more baseline move speed than a Blood DK does with their mobility cooldowns active. It's kind of fun. For weapon enchants, you want Sophic Devotion and Wafting Devotion, and that's actually good as a setup for both Raid and Mythic Plus. Beyond haste, either versatility or crit will be your second best secondary stat. Mastery is definitely the worst, but it's actually not bad. Crit is a little bit better offensively than versatility, and you do parry a lot of attacks, so it's arguably a better total damage reduction stat in Mythic Plus than versatility, but it is less consistent and it won't work against spell damage at all. Versatility gives you more defensive consistency, but less like total damage reduction and damage output than crit. They're both very close for what it's worth. It really is like maximize your item level, gem and enchant your gear, wear item level upgrades, maximize your haste. Then, you know, everything else after that is very minor. All right, I'm almost done. I really like Demon Hunter right now. It's extremely fun and strong. It's not the top dog right now thanks to Druid Rising with this patch, but the thing with this game is that being the #1 spec is always kind of scary. It's great and really fun to be the best, and I am loving Druid right now. But they could get nerfed. Being #2 is usually a lot safer. Historically, you are less prone to getting orbital striked by Blizzard's nerf cannons, and Vengeance Demon Hunter is right there in that #2 spot. It's also just a fun spec to play. Like, if you just turned off all damage numbers, turned off your brain, and you just had fun pressing buttons, Demon Hunter is up there as one of the best. For me, that's really the reason I've been enjoying it so much lately. The new gearing system is really fun, and I've definitely been enjoying that aspect of it while playing Demon Hunter. The fact that I could get a lot of gear, a lot of valuable gear in a short span of time has made the whole experience a lot more fun. Honestly, I think this might be the point in close to 19 years of playing World of Warcraft that I've had the most fun. I really can't remember a time that playing as many characters as I am right now has been this much fun. It's great. I love it. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye.